everybody, welcome to the 2014 West Virginia State Championship from Flatwoods, West Virginia. My name, as always, is Zachary Evans. We'll be bringing you 8 rounds of standard coverage today with players from throughout the state. If you're curious, this is not a national chain affiliated state tournament by any means. This is just a championship organized by Four Horsemen Games in Morgantown, but sponsored by 8 stores from throughout the state. With a lot of the confusion going on with multiple states franchises in the last few years, the players in the state decided to have one for bragging rights of their own, and you're going to watch all of that action here today. In our round 1 feature match, we have on the left Jonathan Shrader. He plays at the Lost Legion, the Castle, down in Beckley, and he is on Esper control. Also on a Mold 6, and his opponent is Brian Huffman from Four Horsemen, who is on Jund Midrange, an interesting Reaper of the Wilds deck. So, one archetype that's pretty standard in this current metagame, and then the Jund deck, which we've seen before in our Friday Night Magic streams, but a little less popular, so it should be interesting to see this. Brian starting off with the turn 1 Elvish Mystic, while Jonathan just scrying, setting up his draws for later. I apologize in advance for the glare, as it is going to be a little bit more difficult in this giant room to try and sort things out than our normal FNM settings. While these players go ahead and start, we want to thank the folks at Lost Legion Games and Comics and their 4 stores throughout the state. They are our round 1 sponsor. And for those of you watching who are in the area, Kentucky, Virginia, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Ohio, on April 5th, Lost Legion in Charleston will be hosting a Star City Games Invitational Qualifier. So for more information, just head over to their website at lostlegiongames.com. We'll talk about that more a little bit later on. Meanwhile, Jonathan stuck on 3 lands here. Well, I guess not stuck on 3 lands as he was on the draw here, but Brian ramping into a turn 3 Pelucranos. He'll go ahead and serve in with the team. So it looks like an Azorius Charm coming from Jonathan here, and that is in fact going to put the Pelucranos back on top of Brian's library and set him back a turn. He is going to take the 1 from the Mystic, dropping down to 18. Excellent turnout at today's event. I don't have a final count, but by my rough estimation, based on the number of tables we had during the players' meeting, it looks like 144 players at today's tournament. Let me see Brian follow up with a Reaper of the Wilds. So not enough mana up for regen, however, so if Jonathan can find a 4th land here, Supreme Verdict will reset the board. He shocks himself with a Godless Shrine, so it's likely that is the plan here. And there is, in fact, the verdict. So 1 Reaper down. We know the Pelucranos is going to come down this turn, but Jonathan having stabilized here at 16. Looks like a Dragon inbound at this point as Brian shocks himself with a Stomping Ground. So the Jund deck just full of goodies. We've already seen a Reaper, a Pelucranos, and a Stormbreath Dragon, so not unlike the Red-Green Monsters archetype. But just splashing back for a little bit more of control and some of the removal, as well as the Reaper of the Wilds. And Jonathan content to spend another Verdict to deal with the Stormbreath. Can't D-Sphere or Azorius Charm it. Here's the Pelucranos that we already knew about. And Brian just passes back. So Detention Sphere answers the Pelucranos. This game going pretty well to plan for Jonathan. Brian down to just 2 cards in hand, one of which is a Sylvan Caryatid, not going to make much of an impact at this stage of the game, and just passes the turn back with 4 mana up, so unlikely that his last card in hand is proactive. And Jonathan goes straight up to 6 and lands an Elspeth. Sun's Champion going to go ahead and make 3 soldier tokens. He's in pretty good spot here. I do not have access to the deck lists, at least this round. Hopefully as the day progresses we'll be able to pick those up to give a little bit better insight into what's in what the exact contents of these decks are. But Brian does have access, at least in his colors, to Hero's Downfall and Dreadbore, so we'll see if he finds an answer to the Elspeth. The Dragon will do a pretty good job of answering it in a couple turns here, assuming Jonathan can't find a removal spell for it. So the Dragon comes down and knocks Elspeth down to 1 loyalty. So Jonathan, with 3 cards in hand, is going to make another set of soldier tokens. Needs to find an answer to that dragon, however. Doesn't seem like one is forthcoming, considering he has spent a lot of time thinking about it. So going to serve in with his non-summoning 6 soldiers. I believe putting Brian down to 12, and then just passes back. So we either have a Doomblade ultimate price type effect here, or we have no answer to that Storm Breath, and we're going to lose Elspeth this turn. But Brian playing off the top here. And in fact, he doesn't have an instant seed removal, so Elspeth is down. The last card in Brian's hand is not a proactive card, so I think we're stopping him during his upkeep. We are going to Monstrous. Interesting there that we chose to go Monstrous in the upkeep instead of the draw step, but either way, forcing Jonathan to respond with mana on his turn as opposed to Brian's. So serving in now, just old-fashioned race, it seems like. Take 5 from unblocked soldiers. So Brian down to 7. We'll see if Jonathan drew a removal spell off the top for the now 7/7 dragon. And there's a Sphinx's Revelation before damaged, so that's going to put him up to 12, drawing 3 cards. And I'm assuming this Jund deck would also have access to Rakdos Return, so that might be relevant at this point too. After all is said and done, you should go down to 5 from the attack. Brian not dead on board, as he's only going to take 5 on the swing back here. But Jonathan, having just reloaded off his Sphinx's Rev, very unlikely that he whiffed on business. So again, no play from Brian. Not sure what the last card in his hand is, but it's obviously not impactful. So Jonathan looking for a black instant speed removal spell for the dragon. Another Supreme Verdict would be fine. It would reset the board, but Jonathan has a lot more creatures or a lot more cards in hand to rebuild than Brian does, and obviously that dragon is going to kill him next turn, barring any massive change in the way the game is being played. So Jonathan, short of a removal spell here, another Sphinx's Revelation would let him survive at exactly 1 if he had it. It looks like he does not, so despite casting a Sphinx's Rev and resetting the board twice with Supreme Verdict, Brian Huffman in his Jund Midrange deck, riding the new Thundermaw and Stormbreath Dragon to a win. It's very difficult for the Azorius decks to deal with, obviously. They have a ton of tempo-based removal, but it's all white, and the dragon being pro-white obviously inhibits the ability to do that. So both players keeping 7 in this second game of our round 1 feature match. Jonathan leading off with a Watery Grave, down a game to the Jund Midrange deck of Brian Huffman, being unable to answer a second copy of Stormbreath Dragon in the first game, despite landing an on-curve Elspeth. So Brian shocking himself in the Overgrown Tomb to land a mana accelerant. We'll see if he can ride that to a Courser here on turn 3. No, even better, it's a Domri Rod. So shocking himself again off a Stomping Ground. Going to go upstairs with Domri, revealing a Stormbreath Dragon. So this cannot. This is not something that Jonathan can be too excited about, though. Being on the play, he will be able to verdict before the dragon gets too far out of control. Obviously, the dragon having haste makes it impossible for Jonathan to verdict before it gets to attack once, but so still yet to see any of the black cards out of Brian's deck, save for one copy of Reaper of the Wild. In the first game, it looks like it's basically a red-green monsters deck splashing for the Reaper. So I'm not sure if he's also playing Doomblades or Ultimate Price or possibly Hero's Downfall and Dreadbore. But he definitely has access to those cards should he want them. Serving in with his Elvish Mystic, probably not the way he drew it up, but having to play his Temple tapped. He didn't have access to 4 mana as he reveals a second copy of Stormbreath Dragon off the top from his Domri activation. So Brian's draw looking very good in this matchup. Turn 1 Dorkin to turn 2 Domri, revealing 2 Stormbreaths off the top. Well, that will help the Stormbreath beat down. Blind Obedience obviously coming out of the sideboard for Jonathan, effectively negating the haste that the dragons will have. It looks like Brian may be stuck on 4 mana here. He's drawn a lot of cards off that Domri. Oh, no, I stand corrected. Just debating on which land to play. And here we see the interaction between the Scry lands and Domri. Scrying first with the red-black Temple before we activate our Domri. So giving ourselves a little bit better chance of drawing live there. Obviously you can't set it up this way, but at least remove a dead card. But unfortunately he still does whiff off the 3rd activation and still has not found a 5th mana, or an untapped 5th mana I should say. So those 2 copies of Stormbreath stranded in his hand. So Jonathan plays his Hallowed Fountain tapped, so likely not on the Quicken Supreme Verdict plan, though that's not nearly as important in this situation given the fact that Blind Obedience is taking care of the haste. So Brian mulling this one over here. He's swung in with his Elvish Mystic, opting not to play his 5-drop and instead lands a Reaper, but the Reaper is going to get dissolved and we're going to extort off the Blind Obedience. So when the dust settles, we've got Jonathan at 18 and Brian down to 15, mostly damaged from his own lands, but as we resolve the Scry off the Dissolve before Domri activation, we are going to have to find a D-Sphere pretty quickly, as we find yet another copy of Stormbreath Dragon off the top with that Domri. Sometimes it's just meant to be here. As the top of Brian's deck is being very kind to him. That Domri emblem is going to be almost impossible to beat. Obviously, the Blind Obedience helps with the haste, but the Hexproof First Strike and Trample are going to make it very difficult for Jonathan should Domri go ultimate. So we need to find a D-Sphere, and we need to find one fast. So there's 4 mana. I think we just played a Watery Grave tap there. We didn't extort there. So a 4 mana for a Jace, Architect of Thought. Go ahead and take a look at Domri here. And that is 7 on the ultimate, giving your creatures double strike, trample, hexproof, and haste. Haste obviously irrelevant given the blind obedience, but it's always possible that Brian's going to sideboard in Destructive Revelry in this matchup anyway for D-Spheres. We go up top with the Jace, but we don't have an answer to that Domri. So now the question Brian has is, does he want to aggressively use his Domri, go ahead and get the emblem now, and try to fade Jonathan drawing a D-Sphere off the top? Or, and he has the ability to see 4 cards next turn with the Jace minus, and likely making the right play there by binning Domri immediately. He's going to give himself the emblem. Still way ahead in this matchup. Very unlikely that he needed to try and net another card off the top. There's no guarantee that you're going to draw an effective card. He's already netted 3 Stormbreath Dragons anyway, so well ahead of the curve here. Likely a Stormbreath coming down this instance. Even that Avacyn's Pilgrim is, or not Avacyn's Pilgrim, good grief, I mean, you're outdated here. Even that Elvish Mystic, I should say, attacking for 2 now. Well, actually, it's going to attack for 0 because it'd be an 0-1 with double strike thanks to the Jace activation, but all things equal, even double strike on the smaller creatures will be hard to deal with. And the Golgari Charm answers the Blind Obedience. And I think we binned that Jace incorrectly there, because I think the Jace -1 ability was neglected. And unfortunately, it's not going to be possible for me to go back out there and correct that. It'll be just take too long given our location. So unless I missed something there, I think we did miss the Jace trigger. But a verdict cleans up the board here, but we still know that Brian has 2 copies of Stormbreath Dragon in his hand. And with double strike from the Domri emblem, they're going to come in for 8 damage apiece. We can even load up this recently played Mutavault, and it'll get in for 4, because it will have haste as well. So Stormbreath does come down and start attacking. And we know there's a second copy in his hand, so Jonathan effectively dead on board here. He's going to need Quicken, Supreme Verdict, or some kind of targeted removal spell. And that removal spell cannot be Azorius Charm. He has a Sphinx's Revelation in his hand, I can see. But even that's not going to be good enough, as with the Mutavault and the 2 Stormbreaths, we're going to be able to get in for a smooth 20 next turn if he chooses that line. So Jonathan just checking out the Domri emblem. It gives them first strike, or it gives them double strike, trample, haste, and hexproof. All things that are going to make Jonathan's life very difficult. I think Quick and Supreme Verdict is his only out here, so he can do that mid-combat and at least fog this turn. A Faded Retribution from the recently printed Born of the Gods would also answer this situation. Supreme Verdict will deal with this dragon, but he knows there's another one coming. All that will do is save, effectively gain him 8 life and leave him with 3 mana, and I literally don't think there's an out in his deck that isn't Fated Retribution or Quicken Verdict. So if I'm Brian here, I probably just load up the Mutavault and attack in. If Jonathan does have the exact scenario we described about, I'd rather lose the Mutavault than lose the second copy of Stormbreath in his hand. And that would be good enough for 12 damage. Of course, that line of play doesn't play around Sphinx's Revelation. We'll let Jonathan go up to 15 and survive at 3. So, a couple options here for Brian. Do not know the contents of the remainder of his hand. Interesting that Brian brought in the Golgari Charms in this matchup. We talked about Destructive Revelry, but again, with the Black Splash for this Jund deck, you do have the access to a much better disenchant, as the 2 other modes of Golgari Charm are much better. And there's the handshake, so a Reaper of the Wilds, another Golgari Charm, and Jonathan shows his hand of double Doomblade. I'm not sure exactly what... might have been a slightly premature scoop, as we could have killed the dragon there. Would not have been able to kill the Reaper. I think possibly Jonathan just... Were you watching that matchup? So now joined by Garrett. Was he playing... He had 2 Doomblades in his hand, so that scoop there at the end is somewhat premature, right? He's not...
No, there's Dominant in play.
Yeah, but that's still just good for...
Hexproof.
Well, you can Doomblade... He's at 11, right? And the Reaper is 4/5?
It's hexproof.
Oh, everything is hexproof.
Yeah, from that.
Well, Garrett, that's why I'm bad at what I do.